Judge, so the drum beat has started. Do you care to make a wager with me when this will happen? When will notice my friend from Verizon switched down like the NFL Sunday ticket from UTV on that. It's kind of amazing. Another amazing plan? Backing away from that. Even if you get NFL Sunday ticket from UTV on a $449.
What is this doing?
Jim?
Yes.
Okay, we're ready.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. My name is Jim Bernabeo. I'm a volunteer for a nationwide organization called Rewiring America. Before I get into the presentation and what is Rewiring America and why are we pushing to electrify everything, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I lived most of my life in Suffolk County, and I live in Smithtown now. Been in the same house for 27 years. I'm a engineer turned project manager in the aerospace industry by day, but I've gotten very interested in things we can do to fight climate change and how to change over to a clean energy system over the past few years. So when opportunity came, the Rewiring America was looking for volunteers to try and get the message out to more people. I volunteered, and here we are. So Rewiring America provided the basic presentation you're about to see. I will add in and talk about some of my experiences, as well as some things that are more specific to New York. I would love if there are questions, either put them in the chat, or if you feel comfortable, come off mute and ask away, and we'll see what we can do. But that really depends on how much interaction we have and how many questions get asked. So without further ado, let me share my screen here. Okay, Rewiring America and Electrifying Our Lives. So first question really is, what is Rewiring America? This is the organization that really runs this. It's a nonprofit that was founded in 2020 with the real idea that says they electrify everything, and we'll get into what that means and what the benefits are that in a few minutes. For the first couple of years, Rewiring America's focus was really on changing policies, getting laws passed, and it really culminated at the federal level in the United States with the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed about a year ago. That really puts a lot of effort into electrifying everything. And we'll talk about that in broad strokes, and then more specifically, what it can do or how it can help you electrify your home, electrify your car. There's a lot of different options in there for financing to help make this switch. And what's really an important thing is there are big things to do, like what power plants are being used, but then decisions made at home over what kind of car we have or how we heat our house also end up, when you add them all over millions of homes, really end up to be a big part of the climate and pollution question. So other than me tell you some of the background, I'm going to go to one of the founders. The gentleman you see there is a guy named Saul Griffith. He's Australian, as you'll be able to tell from the accent you'll hear in the short video I'm going to show you in a second. He is really kind of the technical brains behind this, and I heard him on a podcast about 3 or 4 years ago, and it really opened my eyes about what we can do now and how it's a big job, but very straightforward job to really electrify and clean up the electrical grid. So he can tell it much better than I can. So let's see if we can get this to work.
Sadly, people have the impression that we can't fix climate and still have the American dream. That's not true. The reality is we only need half as much energy as we think, and we don't have to shrink our cars, we don't have to shrink our homes to achieve that. Right now, you think that sounds too good to be true, but here's how you make it true. We need to electrify nearly everything. In 2018,
I'm going to stop this for a second because I think I somehow messed up the making it full screen and we're not seeing the whole thing. So stand by. All right, there's the full screen button I was looking for. Let's start over so you can get the full
sadly,
picture.
people have the impression that we can't fix climate and still have the American dream. That's not true. The reality is we only need half as much energy as we think, and we don't have to shrink our cars, we don't have to shrink our homes to achieve that. Right now, you think that sounds too good to be true, but here's how you make it true. We need to electrify nearly everything. In 2018, I worked with the Department of Energy to map the entire US energy system, where energy comes from and where it goes. Everything from how much energy your toaster uses to how much energy it takes to make steel. It is really amazing just how much energy is wasted. The wasted energy we're talking about isn't really the wasted energy of forgetting to turn your kitchen light off. It's in the way we make and produce energy. More than 60% of the fuels that we use to generate our electricity get wasted as heat. More than 80% of the energy we stick into our cars in the form of gasoline or diesel is also wasted. If we electrify everything, we eliminate a huge amount of the waste. We don't need to shrink our cars. We don't need to turn the thermostat down. And we use less than half of the energy we currently do. We've got to electrify our trucks and our cars. We've got to electrify our homes, our furnaces, our hot water heaters, even the way we cook. And then we need to supply that electricity with our clean, non-wasteful sources, with wind, with solar, with hydro, and with other clean energy systems. If we did that, we're going to save every business and every home money. Wind, solar are the cheapest forms of electricity going onto the grid today. Solar on your roof can be the cheapest energy source that we have ever had. If we use all of this cheap energy, there's an opportunity to save money while improving our energy systems. Think about that for a second. The future can be, we can have cleaner water, we can have cleaner air, we can have cleaner skies and a better environment, and we can save thousands of dollars per year in every household. Why do I know America can do this? It's because America, uniquely in the world, has a history of taking on audacious projects, solving the Great Depression, fighting World War II and winning it for the Allies, launching man into outer space. America got bold and big in that manner, and we do it focused on electrification of the economy. To truly address climate change at scale. And on the
1.5. What did you say?
1.5 teaspoons of pure flour for every
renewable electricity.
Okay, add the volume up all the way.
Let's rewire America.
We need to mute the microphone. What is this, some kind of movie?
Okay, so we had some new folks there and I think I muted them successfully now. So for those of you who just joined in, my name is Jim Bernabeo. I'm a volunteer for Rewiring America. That was one of the founders of Rewiring America, by the name of Saul Griffith, who much better can tell the big story. But to me, the thing that's most important there is we're switching over to clean fuels. Everything is much more efficient. Right now, I get the sun on the roof, the solar panels on my roof goes directly into my car, and there's very, very little loss in that. Whereas previously, somebody had to dig up oil somewhere, transport it, refine it, transport it again to the gas station, and then I burn it in the car, not very efficiently. So at the end of the day, switching to clean energy gives you three distinct advantages. One is lower energy costs. You can see a lot of reasons, but a really easy one to understand is that there's very little waste in comparison. So while we would need to make more electricity as a country, overall, we need to make less energy in total, thereby leading to much lower costs. You're not wasting it. It's not being wasted as heat in your car or heat going out the chimney of your house. The second of the three big impacts is healthier homes. And it's not just homes, it's really a healthier environment. Again, we're not burning things. We're not burning gas in a gas stove and having that exhaust go into our house. You don't have power plants spewing out toxins. And I kind of think back to one of the few good things from March, April of 2020, when everything shut down for the pandemic, which is these stories you'd see in the paper about cities or places where all of a sudden they could see a mountain off in the distance that they hadn't seen in like 50 or 100 years because of the little bit of haze in the environment. But just very quickly, as we stopped putting those exhausts into the environment, these things, nature cleared up itself. And the one that I liked the best was all of a sudden we're able to have dolphins swimming in the canals of Venice, which I don't think anybody who's alive had ever seen before because of the dirtiness, but very quickly cleaned up. So if we can just stop doing that, it could clean up the environment, make it much healthier for us. And then the bigger one here is reduce the climate impact. We've all seen this year many different extreme weather events that are all forced and enhanced by climate, whether it be the orange skies that we had here in June due to the forest fires up north, the big fire that was out in Hawaii recently, the waters off of Florida were over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is more like a hot tub than it is the ocean. But these are all things that are happening. They're just going to continue to get worse. And as we start reducing, putting that carbon into the atmosphere and allowing the environment to do its cool and clean up over time. Okay, so where do the emissions come from? The majority of the emissions in a country come from energy use, and majority of it right now, as it said in there, is from fossil fuels. Now, a lot of the things you see on that left, like soil management, livestock, what kind of coal you use, or what kind of fuel you use in a power plant, aren't things that really you or I can affect. We're doing our things. Maybe we can protest, we can write letters, but it's not decisions that we make itself. But I get some numbers for New York as in particular, and the single biggest source of emissions in New York is buildings, and it's primarily heating, hot water, to a lesser extent cooking, that sort of things. And a lot of those are private buildings like you and I run. The second biggest is transportation, and most of that is private cars and trucks. Smaller amount, large trucks and trains on top of that. Electricity is down at only 13%. So while New York State has a law that by 2040 all of our electricity needs to come from carbon-free sources, that would only reduce 13% of the emissions in New York State. Most of the rest of it has to come from things that folks like us will decide around our kitchen table. Now, it's not the same in all states, but where we live, that is the way the numbers add up. Okay, so what type of things that decisions that we make affect that? What type of car we drive? Been a lot of noise about talk about electric cars lately, and we'll go into that a little bit more, but that's a big one. Something that's got a lot less publicity is how we heat our homes and water. The picture that you see there is something called a heat pump that we'll get into later, but can heat your house much more efficiently than a gas burner or an oil burner, that sort of thing. And it's all clean electricity, especially if the grid cleans up, or if you had your own solar panels. Some of the smaller influences on warming, but some of the bigger influences on health of your house is how we cook the food. Been a lot of stories in the past 6 or 8 months about the effects of using gas stoves in a house, especially in the winter when it's all closed up and that exhaust is going in there, and how it affects us. So as well as how that affects the environment. So there's other items that we can take, and things that there are alternatives out there already. We don't need a big technological advancement or anything like that. And then really the enabler is if you can do your own solar, make your own electricity like I've done, and I'll talk about more in a second, that can really add to it and make all of that much cheaper and more reliable for you because you have your own power source right on the roof. So as kind of we said before, 42% of the energy emissions come from decisions that folks like us make. The thing is, the hardest one and the biggest one is heating your house. I have a gas furnace or an oil burner furnace. If you wait until that February day when it breaks and the repairman comes and says it's really not worth fixing, then it's nearly impossible to get a heat pump in a timely fashion. So it does require some pre-planning, and that's the kind of thing we're going to talk about here, how we can do that and what the options are. The good news is that heat pumps on Long Island, the installation of heat pumps went up 20% from 2021 to 2022. So while there's still a relatively small percentage, they are growing. And we're hoping between getting this word out and from the financial incentives that we'll talk about in a moment to increase that even more, so that we're not adding any more oil or gas burners that are going to be locked in for another 15 to 20 years of emissions. All right, so we can do it. We have the tools, we have the power, and we're going to get into those now. So I mentioned clean electricity. Let's talk about that for a second. I said in New York, there's a law by 2040, we have to have all clean sources of electricity. Solar and wind are by far the biggest, account for almost all of the new electrical power generating in the country and really in the world. But certainly in our area, it's almost exclusively then. If you look at New York in particular, the two biggest sources going forward are going to be offshore wind and hydropower. If you think upstate, there's a lot of hydropower already. Think Niagara Falls, think some of the other falls are coming down from Canada. They are working to add 2 new large capacity power lines to bring more of that power down to the lower part of New York State, New York City area, and some of the other more populated areas. And then the other piece of it is offshore wind. You've probably seen some articles and discussions about the different wind farms. There are 5 wind projects that are approved off of Long Island, 3 for out near Montauk, and 2 more off of Long Beach on the western end. The first one is already installing, as they say, putting steel in the water out 20 or 30 miles off of Montauk, and they expect to start producing electricity by the end of the year. They've already got the cables through Wainscott to bring that onto the grid on Long Island. Once they're all approved, we'll actually be making more power from those, not all approved, all built, but making more power than we need on Long Island. And there are already plans to be able to take that power and put it into New York City, all across to Connecticut, and really kind of further the interconnects to allow us to close some of the gas power plants that are around here. And the plan is to close them all out over the next several years. So we're going to see a big difference there, but those are things that are happening. And while we may be interested, we may, write to our representative, there's not decisions that you or I make for the big picture. So we really want to talk mostly about the billion machines, and that's a lot of machines, but need to electrify across 121 million households in the US, and say, how do we get to 1 billion machines? So it's kind of at the top level. On the right, over 220 million personal vehicles. I think somewhere around 12 or 13 million new cars are sold in the US each year. Right now, the percentage of those that are electric or hybrid electric is pretty small, but again, is rising rapidly. It went from about 5% in 2022 up to 9%. They're expecting, or what they're seeing so far this year. And hopefully there are a lot more new models from new manufacturers coming out in the next few years. So that number should increase dramatically. So that's the single biggest one. You see some of the other 95 million ovens, 98 million space heaters, and then smaller amounts of dryers and a lot of hot water heaters as well, most of which are powered now by gas or oil in the US, certainly in our part of the country. Maybe in other parts of the country where they don't need as much heating, the water heaters may already be electrical. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. There are a lot of different, especially when you get into stuff in the house, there are a lot of different living situations. There are houses, there are apartments, and there's certainly push being made on all of these. For instance, the New York City Housing Authority has a contest going on where they're offering an award to who can come up
about electrifying.
Excuse me? Oop, okay, sorry. Thought I heard a voice there. New York City Housing Authority is coming up with a way have an induction stove to replace in all of their house, their thousands of apartments without having an electrical upgrade, because the ones that are on the market now oftentimes would need a higher voltage, higher current system. So there are technologies being built now to be able to reduce that need and make them much cheaper and easier to put in. That's one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, if you own your own house, you may be looking at how do I replace the space heater? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But these are all decisions that are made by folks like us when we're doing that. And a lot of these things are things you replace once every 10, 15, 20 years, and then you never really think about again. So that's why we're kind of very eager to get the word out here, so that folks aren't buying new ones and locking in those emissions for another 10 to 20 years. So how do you do this? All that stuff costs money. There's one thing: in the long run, it will save you money. As I mentioned before, and this is Rewiring America did a study across the entire country, and they estimate that $1,800, the average amount Americans would save if they electrified everything. And that's going to vary on how much you drive, how big a house you have, what the electric rates are on the oil, what are the prices of oil and gas. So the number could vary wisely, but it's not insignificant for anyone. And I'll show you a little bit of my experience here in a few minutes. So was there a question online, or? Okay, I'll keep going then. Please, if you have any questions, or if I'm going too fast, don't hesitate to jump in or ask me to slow down. I am from New York, like most of you, so I do tend to talk fast. All right, so what money is out there to help you? So as I mentioned before, the federal government passed a law about a year ago called the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, a very big piece of that was literally hundreds of billions of dollars towards jumpstarting this electrification. That rates from everything from electric cars, battery factories, new mines for the critical minerals, wind. They're talking about geothermal. There's a lot of money in for that, but then there's also a bunch of money in through a few different paths to help folks like us put electrical heat in our house, help to buy an electric car, help to change over our stove. The question is, like any government program, there's steps you have to go to. And that's not that somebody shows up at your front door with a suitcase full of 20s, but you could really think this is a bank that you can draw on to help you defray the costs of these things and to help make it lower the upfront costs, so allow you to get the long-term cost savings as well as the environmental and pollution savings that we talked about earlier. So how can you figure out what that is? So at the Rewiring America has put together a website to try and make it simple, and they have a calculator on there. You could see the QR code, or you could just go to rewiringamerica.org. I'm going to attempt to do a real-time display here of what this looks like, but this allows you to say, for your particular situation, what can you do? So if you go there, there's really just a few pieces of information you need to put in, because these what you can be eligible for depends on it. Homeowner or renter, what your tax filing is, the household size, household income, because it is referenced to something called the area median income. So that's why they ask for your zip code. I could tell you on Shelter Island, I have it here somewhere, the area median income is $116,000. So it's pretty significant. So I just threw 90,000 in. So someone a little bit less than the area median income is eligible for $21,000 in incentives. Now, nobody's going to do everything in 1 year, but this can be done over several years. And it's broken down between upfront discounts, which are the big piece of it for someone whose income is less than the area median income. I'll show you a case where that's not true in a second, or tax credits. And I can attest to this, because when I put my solar on last year, I was able to get a tax credit and get a big piece of that back. Probably the first time in many years that I got a really nice income tax refund in April, which was a nice change of pace. Fortunately, not going to happen this year. But it tells you, if you scroll down here, the different types of things and how much you're eligible for. Is it a rebate, or is it a tax credit? And there's all different types of things. Heat pumps, electrical upgrade. So if you do need to upgrade the electrical service in your house, there's significant money available to help you with that. If you need to update the wiring, if you're just looking to improve the efficiency by by doing things like window upgrades, all that kind of stuff, weatherization. It really can cover a lot of this. And this gives you guidelines of what you can do. You can click and get more info on what these things are and how the system works. Now, there's two phases of it. And the other part you'll see here is that the rebates, it says 2024, that's because the rebates are administered by the states. So the federal government earlier this year came out with the guidelines to the states. Now the states are developing their own programs. So once the details of that become available, which is supposed to be by the end of this year, these rebates would be available starting next year. The tax credit stuff is already available. So if you do any of these items this year, when you go and do your taxes next April, you should be able to get that money off the top. Now that is, I think the term they use, these are non-refundable. So you actually have to have an income tax liability to be able to get this back. So depending on your situation, that may or may not be the case. But if you're in a lower income place, you're probably more suited for the rebates. So does that all make sense? Anybody have any questions about? Somebody has $1,800 per year or overall. This is per year. So it says up there the savings. So again, that's an estimate based on an average house, an average amount of driving, and that kind of stuff. So it could add up very quickly. I'm just going to quickly change this to show you if you're in a higher income. You see, someone in a higher income, they're almost double the area median income. They're not eligible for the discounts, but are eligible for more tax credits. So the idea is people in higher income are better able to put up the money and get them back in the tax credit as opposed to having a discount at the time of purchase. So you see the same sorts of things there. And in some cases, the amounts are less, not for instance, in rooftop solar, it's 30% of the cost no matter what. So any other questions or comments on that? I know I ran through a lot of stuff and I'll try not to keep scrolling around because I know that can make you sick if you're looking at that on the screen. This is one of the key pieces. I encourage you to go to the Rewiring America website. You can see it's very simple, rewiringamerica.org. There's a lot of information on there about what all these things mean. What is a heat pump? How does it work? If you're interested in that part, what is eligibility? Again, being a government program, it can get very confusing, and I'll talk in a second, an upcoming slide about where you can go for help. So let me go back to the presentation. Oops. All right, so there's a few case studies in here. I'll go through one or two of these. These are more like generic people, and then I'll go to my case study, which I think may be more interesting because I can speak in more detail. So we talk about this family called the Colemans in Cleveland, Ohio. They're $128,000 for a family of four. So they're under 80% of that area median income. So as we learned earlier, they should be eligible for a lot of upfront rebates as they look to electrify their house. You can already see this picture. They have a plugged-in car, so you know they've changed that part already. But as we go through this, the Colemans go electric. Again, this is the kind of thing, like I said before, you're not going to do all of these things in 1 year. If you do, that's more power to you. But a lot of them aren't simple. They take effort. They take upfront money, a lot of coordinating with contractors and stuff. But here, these folks can switch. Oh, sorry about that. If I start here, one of the more simple ones, this year, they're going to change from a propane range to an electric range. The cost installed $750, but they could get the entire thing back. So so it's free for them, including $1,500 to update the wiring. So huge advantages. Again, there's some effort to go through it, but it ends up not costing you anything at the end of the day. Some of the other efforts are a little bit more, like a water heater. The cost is $3,000, but you can get 2/3 of it paid for between the tax credit and the upfront discount. So it only costs $875. Now that's something you're going to have to replace periodically in your house anyway. So you can go buy another gas, or in this case, propane one, but then you're paying the full cost, and it's going to cost you more, and you're going to continue to be putting carbon into the atmosphere. So, in some ways, it's like a no-brainer to go this way. And that's really what the government is trying to do here, make it too good to pass up. So, same thing down here with a furnace. Now, one of the nice things I didn't mention, I talked about a heat pump. A heat pump is basically an air conditioner that can work in both directions, so it could both cool your house in the summer and heat your house in the winter. So they're able to replace their propane furnace and their window air conditioning unit with one heat pump system. So it really gives you more than just the heating part you're getting. And how that, and one of the key things about this, and I don't know if I mentioned earlier, is a heat pump doesn't actually use the energy in your house to make heat. It uses it to move heat from outside to inside in the winter, or in the case of in the summer, moving it from the inside to the outside. So as a result, it's 3 or 4 times more efficient than a gas furnace would be. So that's another huge advantage. You don't have to, you're not polluting the atmosphere, and you're using 1/3 to a quarter of the energy to heat your house than you use if you use gas. And in the past, there was an idea that those only work down to a certain temperature. So it might be good in some place like, down south, where maybe a couple of days it gets down to the 40s or 50s and you want a little heat. But over the past several years, the technology has increased dramatically, and there are items called specifically cold climate heat pumps that are rated at their full capability down to -5 degrees Fahrenheit. And they don't shut off and not work after that. They just don't work as well. So that's a temperature we rarely see. And one of the most interesting facts I've heard is the country in Europe that has the highest percentage of their heating done through heat pumps is Norway. And that tells me 2 things. One, Norway's really cold, obviously. So that tells me they work. More and more people wouldn't be doing it if they didn't work in those climates. And they have the most to gain by more efficient heating because it is very cold, and they spend much more energy and much more of their effort on heating. And they're the ones who are seeing the biggest bang for their buck. So they're I don't remember the exact number, but I want to say that more than 60% of houses in Norway already have electric heat pumps instead of more traditional gas or oil, or in this case propane furnaces. So sorry about the aside there, but I meant to mention that earlier. So you can see here the other items, and I think the next slide they show the same thing graphically. Over the years, they're able to replace all these different items at little or no cost, and end up with a much more efficient and much cleaner home, with the government helping to foot a big piece of it. Let me just pause there for a second. Is any questions or comments there? Anything like me to elaborate on or try and explain further? Okay, I'll assume it's all crystal clear then. There are a few others in here, but I'm going to jump forward to my case study, because that's much closer to home, and certainly I think more interesting to us, because I can give you real numbers of what someone on Long Island is seeing here over the past couple of years, and what's left in front of me now that these new rebates and tax credits are coming due. So where did I start at? I started out by changing over my cars, my first big thing back in 2020. The lease was up on the Infiniti that I have, and you could see there my artsy picture of my Tesla Model 3 in front of the sunset in Florida. Let me just explain the bottom part. This is a picture out of the Tesla app, and what this shows is all the charging for the year. The blue is charging done at home. The red is on the superchargers that are done on the highway, and then the gray is at basically anything else. And this is telling me that in this year, which was, I guess I did this back in January, saved about $1,800 between what it would do if I was driving the same miles with a similar gasoline car, similar size gasoline car. So that's one item, this car, this saved me $1,800. Now, one of the biggest pieces of that is all that blue charging, to me, is essentially free, because I have a level 2 home charger, which, by the way, I got a rebate through PSE&G, which is another thing that I forgot to say. New York State and PSE&G and National Grid also have rebates for energy upgrades. There are, I'll show you in a second, there are some rebates for changing to a heat pump, for instance, from PSE&G. Because you can see for them, they're, instead of you buying gas or oil to do it, now I'm going to buy a lot more electricity. So it's in their best interest as well to help you pay for that. In this case, they helped me pay for my level 2 charger, which will charge my car. I get about 35 to 40 miles of range added. So on a typical day driving around town, I charge it at night. It takes an hour or two to get back up to, the 70 or 80% that I charge it on. If it was really low, it would still, charge fully in like 5 or 6 hours. So it's more than sufficient for what I need. The other part of that was in 2022, as I mentioned earlier, I added solar panels to the house. This is a picture of the back of my house. I have a total of 30 panels on there. Just to give you an idea, my house, the year before that, with the car, when I had the car already, I used about 8 megawatt hours. This system, when I worked with the solar company, they said it would produce about 10 over a course of a year, ended up producing closer to 12. So I'm making significantly more than I need because I do plan to add electrical load in the future, as we'll talk about here in a second. So let's talk about the money part of it first, because that's probably the most interesting part to most people. So these are the exact numbers based on what I paid and what I got this back. The total cost, including the roof, and that's an interesting part. If you get your roof redone in the same year you get solar, that counts as part of the solar installation. So the 30% tax credit applies to that as well. So in my case, I didn't have to do the roof quite yet, but I was going to have to do it sometime in the next few years anyway, because it was 27 years old. So I did them all together. Also, any tree trimming or cutting down, as long as it's done in the same calendar year, all of that can be included as part of the solar installation. So the total cost of that was $46,000 for all of that stuff. Now, I could have financed it, and it would have been, depending on which company I went with, paid it back over the 8 or 11 years. One of the companies offered me a discount if I bought it up front, so I decided to do that. So this with that upfront discount. So I took the 30% off of that. That's $14,000 off. I got New York State as a credit for up to $5,000, which I mentioned. Well, again, these are both credits that came off my taxes when I did them the same year. So the net cost out of pocket was $27,000. Now remember, that also included the roof. The cost to just do the roof was almost $10,800. So if I subtract that out, I really paid about $17,000 for the solar. So now instead of having an electric bill that was about $180 per month on a budget plan over the year, I now have a bill of about $20 per month with PSE&G, because I'm still connected to the grid. And anytime we make power, which kind of brings me to the next slide, but before I get that, so I get about a $20 bill. So the payback time, just looking at how much I'm paying now versus what I would estimate paying in the future, is about 7 years. Depends on how much you expect the cost of electricity to rise, and if my usage rises, because for instance, I had a heat pump or get a second electric car, it might even be less. And I just this week saw a study, a nationwide study, where they came to the same conclusion that about 7 to 8 years is the normal payback for a solar system. And the good part is the solar panels are warranted for 25 years. So for the last 18 of those years, I'm going to be really in good shape financially. So what is the bottom picture? Before I answer any questions, let me go to that. This is, I don't know if any of you have gone to PSE&G. They call it My Smart Energy. If you have one of their smart meters that they've been putting in over the last year, you can see, and I believe this is hour or 30-minute increments I'm showing here for one day, from midnight through the day all the way to the next night. So overnight, the light blue lines at the top, that's when I'm drawing energy from the grid. So overnight, this was taken, you could see up here, last summer. So I'm sure we had air conditioners on in the house. So there was some usage all night. During the day, once the sun comes up, you could see I'm adding power back onto the grid. Again, probably we were home, air conditioners were on. I'm guessing maybe we turned the dryer on here, or either that, or maybe some clouds came through while that hour was low. And then as you get back into the evening, you get back into using it. And then at 11 o'clock, you see this huge spike, because that was when I had the timer set to charge the Tesla that I showed you over here. So the first thing that always jumps out to me when I see this is how much more energy charging the car uses than anything else you use in the house, including the air conditioners. People say, oh, air conditioning uses a lot of energy. Well, not really compared to that. Over the course of a year, about 40% of my energy is used to charge the car. And that's with me working home half the time. So it's not like I'm driving enormously long commutes and that sort of thing. So you can see that makes a huge difference. But with the solar installation I have, over the course of a year, I make more energy than I use. So really all I pay is the $20 connection fee each month to PSE&G. So again, I covered a lot of ground there. Questions, comments? Wow, I guess all understood everything. Okay, I'll keep going then. So this year wasn't as big, but I did change out my old stinky gas lawnmower for a nice battery powered lawnmower. Much quieter. I come in from mowing lawn, not smelling of fumes. I will say I did buy a second battery to it, and if the grass is very tall or very wet, I may have to wait for it to recharge. But if I stay on top of it, it works great for my decent size but not humongous yard. But there are even like I said, more expensive and more capable versions of the gas of the electric mowers that can also be used for bigger yards and more situation. So what's left? That's not everything that I have in my house. So the big things you see here on the left, we still do have a second car that my wife's car, as she likes to say, and she likes to remind me, its lease is up about a year from now. So sometime in 2024, we'll be getting another car. I think I've already got her convinced that we should go with another electric car. She wasn't convinced when it was time to get this one back there. There just weren't as many options around. You couldn't get something kind of similar to that sort of crossover SUV. Unlike me, she didn't really love the styling of the Tesla, but so I couldn't convince her back then, but I certainly see next time. And I could get depending on which car you buy, I would get $7,500 off of the cost of that. You have to be careful. You have to have US content, and those rules are changing, but the dealers can tell you, or you can look online and see which cars are eligible. On the left is the gas stove. That one is going to be easy for us because we originally had an electric stove, so the power is there. So it's just a matter of pulling that out and replacing that with an induction range. And here's another aside that I will make here. Induction ranges aren't the old electric stoves with the coils that you remember from days of your youth. Induction stoves are able to cook much faster. We did an experiment with a single burn induction cooktop, and that compared to my gas stove, I was able to boil a quart of water in half the time. They can also, you can set the temperature that you hold it. So once you figure out what temperature you like to cook your eggs at, you just tell it, go to whatever it is, 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and it will go to it, get to it very quickly and hold it right there. So you don't have to worry about burning your eggs or having the water boil over. So a lot of advantages, as well as not polluting the house, not putting gas into putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And then what you see on the right is a picture from the grubby part of my basement of my gas furnace on the left and gas hot water heater on the right. And as you can see from the bottom, there are $2,000 tax credits available to me for each of those from the federal government. But if you go to the PSE&G website, and they have something that they call their home comfort program. You have to use one of their partner companies. But there's a list of probably 200 companies, a spreadsheet you can download. And if you look just as an example for a air source heat pump, like we were talking about now, depending on your income, if you're higher income, you get $1,000 per 12,000 BTUs. Now, a typical house needs somewhere between 3,000 to 4,000 BTUs. So you're talking about a $3,006 rebate that depending again on your income. So you add that on top of this, you could get most of this cost paid for by the combination of the federal government and the utility. Now you have to do some work, you have to arrange it. Getting a heat pump installed could be pretty simple. If you already have central air conditioning, they just replace the unit with a heat pump. If you don't, if you have baseboard heating like I have in my house, it's a little bit more complicated, but can still be done. Again, you need to find a contractor who knows what they're talking about and is willing to work with you on that sort of thing. But there's a lot of money out there to help you make these changes. So I'm hoping, if nothing else, that's the one thing you go away from this. There's 3 big advantages to making these changes: saves you money, less pollution, less climate impact, and there's a lot of money from the government and from the utilities out there to help you make these changes. Okay, and if you need help, the organization called NYSERDA, which I wrote down somewhere here, it's the New York State Energy Research Development Agency, I want to say. they've set up a series of what they call clean energy hubs. So if you go to if you just search NYSERDA clean energy hubs, it'll give you a whole list, and they have different ones for different parts of the state. There's the name and the link and the phone number of the person who's the one for Long Island. He's part of the I believe part of the Cornell Cooperative Extension. That's what this stands for. But his job is to help connect you with local contractors, help people figure out for their particular situation, their particular house, how do I get there from here? So this is a local resource that can help you. And so somebody had asked, which roof solar company did I use? I used a company called Harvest Solar. Rewiring America doesn't recommend people, or hasn't gotten to the point of doing this sort of very granular person by person helping, but New York State is trying to set that up. They've already got some people identified. So if you really are looking for more details about your specific one and want to talk to someone who's really got the information, got the background, this is the place to go. So I would encourage you to call Michael, send him an email, and he could really help you out with going forward. And I'd love to hear feedback about how that works. So we're getting close to the end. What can we do? As we said here, there's a lot of things that folks like you and I can do, apart from people who are making power plants or people who are making steel or large shipping, all those things that do contribute to carbon, but are not things that folks like us do. But we do have a lot of this in our hands, and we need to act now so that we're ready and we're not locking in another 20 years of a gas burner, for instance, because we're having to make the change on a cold February day. And I would say one thing about having the car and the solar panels, I can't tell you how many people ask me questions about it. What's it like to charge it? Does the solar, do all of your power, all that kind of thing. So I feel like sometimes I become a walking discussion, but I'm happy to have those discussions. As you can kind of tell, I get all excited, a little geeky, my wife would say, about the technological part of it. But I'm sure if you have a neighbor with an electric car or with solar, or you see them putting in a heat pump, they would be glad to talk about it and share some of their experiences and how it's worked for them, what it took to get it working. So you can become the ambassador, even if you don't want to become a Rewiring America volunteer. But although I'm sure we'd always be looking for more volunteers. Friends and family, when I did the first one of these for a library, I did it at the local Smithtown library, and half the audience was friends and family. I'd been talking a little bit, they came and saw that, and I know at least one of them is already in a house he owns, replaced the gas furnace with a electric heat pump and loves it. And it was easier and cheaper than he imagined. So it's all good. The other part you could do is encourage your local officials to adopt policies. Rewiring America has a section where they have different local governors and supervisors and stuff, and they help them to implement these sorts of programs. And if they hear from more folks like us, I've contacted the supervisor in my town and say, hey, look, this is something that we think is important, and we want our local governments to do as well. So don't hesitate to reach out. Another one that's important is school districts. Part of I think it was actually the infrastructure bill that was passed earlier, has money to help school districts transition to electric buses, which again, cleaner, quieter. I don't know about you, but there's nothing worse than an early morning and the big school bus rumbles by and shakes the whole house, the big diesel school bus. That can all be gone. Not to mention, you don't have the kids breathing in all those diesel fumes. So that there's money out there for that too. So please don't hesitate to reach out to your local elected officials, contractors. All right. I mentioned it a couple times before. The end now. Any other questions, comments about the car, about the house, about the IRA? I think I have one of my other volunteers on the phone here as well, so she can help me if there's any really hard questions. I will turn them over to Janice. Okay, so either it was very clear or everybody lost interest. I don't know which it is.
No, I
I'm
think
hoping to go with the first.
you have given us a lot of information to think about and a lot of different places to go check out. And I thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you for attending. We're hoping to get the information out. And the Shelter Island Library is recording this.
Yes,
so it will
Jim,
be
thank
available
you.
later if you want to go back, or if somebody wants to see it. it could tell you where to find it.
Yes, Jim, thank you so much. Thank you for all of the information. This is extremely helpful.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
There are no other questions.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
Jim.
rest of your night.
There was a question about looking into whether solar panels are a particular risk in a hurricane. You see that one in the chat?
Oh yeah, I see that. I mean, I believe they're rated for that. Now, if you lived in a very high hurricane place, maybe there's sort of special, more secure they can do that, but more secure ways they can install them. But I think you'd have to talk to the individual contractor about that, because I think a lot of that will depend on how it's installed on your particular house, which of course is going to be unique for everybody. Yes. I see somebody with their hand raised. Old school. Ooh, we can't hear you yet.
Have to unmute.
Okay, one of the things I'm curious about is the use of battery backups in case, you have a problem with electrical supply. Can you power your own home with a backup system if the grid goes down?
You can. I did not. In my case, the battery backup would have cost about as much as the rest of the solar, and I didn't think it was worth it because we don't really lose power that much around here. Now, if you're in a place where you're more susceptible to it, you may want to rethink that. But I would say going forward, one of the bigger things that they're talking about is being able to use your electric cars to power the house. The Ford F-150 Lightning comes with this already. That's the new pickup truck from Ford. There is some extra equipment you have to put in the house, but I think I heard that the average battery in a large pickup truck is several times larger than what most people put in for their battery backup. So without costing anything extra, because if you have it in there already, you could use that as the backup for your home. And I think going further, that's probably going to be more the case, but you certainly can either Tesla has something they call the Powerwall, which is battery, or there are other folks too that you also could get a battery backup now if you're in a situation where you lose power a lot. And then you don't really even need to use the grid backup. You could just charge it during the day and use it at night yourself if you don't want to have to rely on the grid at all. But I didn't not do that, so I can't speak to how well that works specifically.
Thank you.
Sure. Somebody did say something in the comments about improving the efficiency, and absolutely, if you go to a lot of these folks like the Clean Energy Web, one of the first thing they'll probably suggest is having a home audit, because really it's important no matter how you're heating this house, but in some ways it's more important if you're using a heat pump, so you don't have to oversize it to replace windows, seal doors, get insulation, all that kind of stuff to make sure your house is efficient as you can make it, and then size your heating and cooling system appropriately. So yes, thank you for that reminder from Stephen.
Okay, and I see somebody asked about the recording. Once we upload it from here at the library, we'll be able to email out the link with the recording. And Jim, I'll provide that to you as well. So.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'd like to thank everybody for your attention, and hopefully you'll have good luck electrifying.
Thank you so much for this.
All right.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
good
you,
night,
Jim.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
For doing this.